Putin has not been able to take that land, not in 4 years, is it nearly 12 years, because this war started back in 2014.
Yeah.
And it was Alexander Stubb, the president of Finland, who said before Christmas that belt is the gateway to Kyiv and indeed the rest of Ukraine. So this is existential.
Hello and welcome to Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. Now today, on day 1428, yes, 1428 of Vladimir Putin's 10-day special military operation or full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And that means that we're just over a month off the war starting its 5th year. But we're very privileged to be talking to Cormac Smith, an old friend of the show. Cormac, an Irishman, but a former British diplomat to Ukraine, and he worked with the Ukrainian government, specialising in communications, and he's a regular contributor, not just to Frontline, but also to On the Brink. Cormac, welcome back to Frontline.
Philip, it's lovely to be back.
There's lots going on at the minute around the world, and unfortunately Ukraine seems to be taking a second, third or fourth headline, if it's even getting a headline at the moment. I was reading a report by Klitschko, the mayor of Kyiv, about the pressure that there is on the Ukrainian people at the moment. What are you picking up?
Philip, I'm picking up this huge pressure on the Ukrainian people. It's absolutely grim. I've spoken to several friends in the last few days who are telling me, one friend of mine who's an ambassador in a major European city, and his mother is back in Kyiv with temperatures of 6 to 8 degrees inside her apartment. And people are really, really suffering. Can I read you? I spoke to a friend of mine, Peter Dickinson, he's a Brit who's lived out in Kyiv for well over 20 years, but he's also the Ukraine Alert editor on the Atlantic magazine. And what he told me just earlier on, if I can read that out to you.
Please do.
Excuse me if I put the old glasses on and just get it up as I wrote it down. I basically said the mood is grim. Millions are freezing and just hanging on. Exhaustion widespread. Many have left Kyiv. Others will flee if they can. Most see no way of coping with the relentless Russian attacks. A new strategy is required to decentralize the energy system and make it less vulnerable. Repairing the existing system is no longer enough. If the extreme cold weather persists for another few weeks, there could be catastrophic consequences.
Does that mean that Vladimir Putin's tactic of attacking the energy infrastructure to sap the resolve of the Ukrainian people is actually working?
It's a question of the body or the lash and which gives out first. Now, I will always say, from my time among the Ukrainian people, that they are the toughest, most resilient people I have ever come across. But I am getting a very different sense from all of my friends who I talk to at the moment, that it is just really, really grim. And yes, war criminal Vladimir Putin, who is already an indicted war criminal, is daily now attacking civilian targets and civilian infrastructure with the express desire to break the will of the Ukrainian people in the midst of one of the coldest winters in many, many years. And unfortunately, with all the other things that are going on in the world, our eye is in the West is being taken off it. We need to start paying close attention again.
Yeah, well, we'll come on to the rest of what's going on at the moment, but does that mean that there is real domestic pressure on President Zelensky to try and do something about this? And how does that tie in with the impact that the corruption scandal had across the energy infrastructure and Zelensky's popularity?
Well, there is pressure on Zelensky, but I think from the people that I'm speaking to, the overall impression is they're all in this together. And the recent corruption scandals, and in particular the one relating to the energy sector, has been really, really unfortunate. But, you know, Ukraine is on a journey of dealing with corruption, and there have been several peaceful civil protests in the last year alone, and Zelensky has listened to the people. This is very different to what would happen in other corrupt countries like Russia or Belarus, where protests are suppressed violently by the authorities. Ukraine is a democracy. They have taken democracy to their hearts, not just the government, the Ukrainian people. I learned that for 2 years because they know what lack of democracy is like, having either grown up in the Soviet system, aka the Russian Empire, or if they hadn't grown up in it, their parents and grandparents have. So yes, there's pressure on Zelensky, but I think certainly the people that I speak to realize that, you know, Zelensky is probably doing the best that he can. This is, you know, this is horrible pressure from Russia. And to be quite honest, we're not doing enough to either censure Putin or to support the Ukrainians.
Well, again, and not doing enough. You know, I think we saw the Ukrainians giving a lot of concessions to the Americans whenever they produced a 28-point peace plan, and that's translated into a 20-point peace plan that has been negotiated, you know, in America, negotiated with EU partners and coalition of the willing partners, and they've all come out in supporting it. And then Vladimir Putin turns around and says, "No, niet." And when he says "niet," Donald Trump seems to turn around and then blame the Ukrainians and blame President Zelensky for starting the war. What's President Trump on?
Well, you know, you're a better man than me if you can say what President Trump is on. I think he is sociopathic. I think he is a narcissist. I have said 2 years ago on another channel that I believed he was in Putin's pocket. Nothing that I have seen since he has come back through his second term of presidency suggests to me that he is not working on Russia's side. You know, Ukraine, we should remember, I think, has agreed to 7 ceasefires to in an effort to progress peace negotiations. Putin has refused at every time, and the rhetoric that we have coming from Putin himself and out of the Kremlin is that there can be no compromise with Ukraine, that Russia will achieve its objectives, and their objectives, let us remember, is the destruction or the obliteration of Ukraine and Ukrainian national identity. As a very good friend of mine said to me back in 2016, Putin wants Ukraine without Ukrainians. This very friend reminded me of this on the phone only 2 nights ago. I didn't understand it then. I do now.
Well, remember, you know, way back, I think it was 96 it started off with, or 93, Putin started talking about little Russians. He called the Ukrainians little Russians. In 2 ways, he meant that as a very derogatory view of the Ukrainian people, but he also was trying to suggest that they're not Ukrainian, they don't have a separate identity, they are Russians, but should be controlled from Moscow. But given what's going on with the peace negotiations and all the rest of it, you're in touch with people on the ground inside Ukraine. What are they thinking of what Trump's doing?
Oh, absolutely appalling. There are none of my Ukrainian friends have any time for Donald Trump at all, because they're the ones that are at the hard end. They saw their president publicly humiliated and treated in a disgusting way in the White House. Was it last February?
Yeah.
And really, you know, I mean, Trump sometimes seems to change his mind, sometimes seems to suggest that he has even said during last year that he thought that Ukraine could win and take all of their land back. But, you know, to date, Donald Trump is yet to put one iota of pressure on Russia and Vladimir Putin. All the pressure he puts on is on Ukraine. And as I think you've said already, very, very recently, again, he has said that it is Ukraine that he sees as stalling these peace negotiations, when in fact the Ukrainians, as you've already said, Philip, have already made some huge concessions. There are one or two that they will not make. They will not concede the additional Donbas land, 25% of Donetsk. And to remind people, that's the fortress belt. That is heavily fortified. Putin has not been able to take that land, not in 4 years, in, is it nearly 12 years, because this war started back in 2014.
Yeah.
And it was Alexander Stubb, the president of Finland, who said before Christmas that that belt is the gateway to Kyiv and indeed the rest of Ukraine. So this is existential. There is no way that Ukraine can give that up, and there is no way they can de facto recognize that Russia is occupying and freeze on the current lines of control, but there is no way that they can recognize that de jure.
Yeah, well, whilst everything else is going on, we've got the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov turning around today and saying that if Greenland is vital to the security of the United States, then Crimea is vital to the security of Russia, and is turning what is happening internationally with the pressure coming out of Donald Trump on Greenland, turning that into the way Russia's going. Now, I cheekily on social media put a little bit out saying, therefore, Kaliningrad is vital from a security perspective to Poland, and I haven't had a response from Foreign Minister Lavrov yet. But what do you think is going on with regard to Greenland, and how do you think Vladimir Putin will be taking that into his playbook?
Let me say two things. Let me first say what my mother drilled into me when I was a little boy: 2 wrongs don't make a right. So that's a completely spurious point that Sergei Lavrov has made, conflating Crimea with Greenland. But back to Greenland, I was on another station earlier on, and I was asked, what does Donald Trump want? Donald Trump can have unfettered access for his military to all of Greenland. The Americans used to have, under an agreement back in 1951, the Americans can have as much military presence. They had at one stage during the Cold War 17 military bases. They could reoccupy those bases, and they could build more tomorrow with the full cooperation of the Kingdom of Denmark, which is a NATO ally, if they wished. I'm also reliably informed that if they wanted to drill for rare earth metals, which is becoming more practicable now that the earth is warming up, the Danes would be very, very happy to work with them, provided they were willing, that the Americans were willing to make the investment there. So really, I've thought long and hard about this. And what I said earlier on, I think I said before that Donald Trump is a narcissist. And I think what he wants to go down in history as the American president who has increased the size of the United States to a greater extent than any other president. And to do that, he is willing to smash the rules-based order into smithereens. That rules-based order that, although it's imperfect, has given the world the greatest period of peace and prosperity and security since the end of the Second World War, is currently on life support. And it's mainly on life support because of the actions of Donald Trump.
So yesterday on this channel, I was talking to General Philip Breedlove, who's a former SACEUR, Supreme Allied Commander Europe, and commander of European Command, EUCOM. And they're very double-hatted. NATO commander for the whole of NATO, and US National Commander for all troops in military capability based in Europe. And he turned around and said, because there's an international agreement in place between the Kingdom of Denmark and the United States, the 1951 Greenland Defence Treaty, then if Donald Trump gave US military officers an order to take Greenland militarily, it would be an illegal order, and they could legally refuse it. And if they didn't, they could be prosecuted under current US domestic law. Donald Trump could nullify the international agreement himself by signing an executive order, but there's no signs that he's doing that, and he's not mentioning that. Do you think this is all bluff and bluster out of him?
I think it is, to an extent. I think Trump is behaving like a quintessential bully. And I think that means that what our leaders have to do is stand very, very strong, the sort of stance that Macron and Carney in Canada seem to be taking, slightly more diplomatic approach from our own Keir Starmer at the moment. But let's see how it goes. Look, I've said Donald Trump is a narcissist. He is, I would say, go as far as to say he is sociopathic. By that I mean he is devoid of empathy for other human beings. Unfortunately, that same man controls the greatest military force the world has ever known. The only thing that can ultimately stop Donald Trump is the American people, and the generals and other members of the military will have a very strong role to play in that. And there has been talk among a number of prominent former officers making it very clear that they took a pledge to the Constitution, not to Donald Trump. So it remains to be seen. But certainly, I think, one hopes, I think that actually going into Greenland and using force to illegally annex it, as, say, Russia did with Crimea in 2014, would be a step too far. But it comes down to, will our Western leaders have sufficient steel in their spines, and will they have sufficient unity to make it very, very clear to Donald Trump what the stakes will be if he is to do that? I think, and it's my assessment only, and there's much bigger and more experienced heads than mine, but my assessment is that if we do that, if we stand united and strong, as they say, taco, Trump always chickens out.
Well, and Trump always chickens out, but we're having to deal with this at the moment. And you've been a comms professional into these sorts of levels of government and things beforehand. What advice would you be whispering into Keir Starmer's ear and Francois Macron's ear and Mark Carney's ear and Schulz's ear and anyone else that you could get from a comms perspective? A, trying to suggest what's going on, and B, how do you deal with it?
Look, for me, the most important thing is absolute unity of purpose, and our allies and our partners, the coalition of the willing, if you like, speaking with one voice. So you or I don't know, I certainly don't know what conversations are going on behind closed doors, to which hopefully Donald Trump and his people
and do you think that's where most of the work is actually happening?
I would hope it is. I don't know. But certainly, I mean, you put the hypothetical question. If I was giving the advice, the first advice was we must speak with one voice. We must have absolute unity, and that voice must spell absolute resolve and strength. Because we've all been saying for many, many years that the Russians understand only strength. Putin understands only strength. The minister that I worked for in Ukraine a number of years ago said to me one day, we have a saying in Ukraine, Cormac, you get more with a kind word and a gun than a kind word alone. And, we could learn a lot from the Ukrainians. So we need to be very clear about the message, but that message needs to be unified, because Trump, like Putin, will seek to divide and conquer, and that's already been made very, very clear, by the way, in some passages of the American National Security Strategy, which was published before Christmas, which made it very, very clear that Trump is no friend of Europe, and Europe is in Trump's sight. And he talks very openly, or the strategy talks very openly, of working with what they call patriotic parties. For that, read the far right, in countries who they would see as fellow travellers to the current White House MAGA regime, I will call it.
Yeah, but it's interesting. The National Security Strategy didn't mention Greenland once, and Donald Trump's trying to say that that's his most important security concern at the moment. So I think it's probably not worth the paper it's written on. But interestingly, you talked about words and a big stick together. Emmanuel Macron is the only individual who's come out with the suggestion of a big stick, an economic stick from Europe. Do you think it's right and proper that we should be coming out more overtly and threatening Donald Trump if we consider him being the bully?
Yes, I do. Philip, I learned something at a very basic level many years ago. If you get into a fight, you are going to get hurt. And it was my father that told me, you win a fight if you hurt your opponent more than they hurt you. So I think there has to be an acceptance. We have to make it very clear that we are willing to actually follow through on our threats, be they economic or putting military in place or starting to sell off US bonds or call in American debt, of which Europe holds a tremendous amount. We've got to make it very, very clear that this is what we're threatening to do. But actually, we have not just to make it clear, we have to be resolved ourselves that we are willing to take the pain and the societal pain and the short-term pain to our own economies and our own people that will be involved in that, and economically that'll hurt you and me as well, Philip. And it's only if Donald Trump believes that we are serious and we are not going to back out because we're afraid of getting hurt. Because the one thing about bullies, if you back down to a bully, they won't respect you. They will treat you as a plaything.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You mentioned the debt that we own. The UK owns the second highest amount of US debt, but just behind Japan, and I think it's $888 billion. And therefore, we start selling that off cheap, that would hurt the US economy enormously. But within that, if you're Vladimir Putin sitting behind his big oak desk, as I keep saying, in Moscow with a very large glass of best Russian vodka over ice and a big white cat on his knee, what will he be thinking about what's going on at the moment?
Well, Philip, you just took the words out of my mouth. So instead of best Russian vodka, let's say they're cracking the champagne open in Moscow at the moment, and they're cracking the champagne open in Beijing as well, because, you know, the Soviet Union, Russia through the Soviet Union and on, has tried to divide and destroy and defeat NATO for many, many years. And now it looks like if it's going to happen, it'll be Donald Trump who destroys NATO, because make it very, very clear, if Donald Trump is to carry through on his threats and to attempt to seize NATO by force, that is not only the end of NATO, that is the end of our rules-based order as we've known it for 80 years, which I said already is on life support. So I think they will be rubbing their hands with glee in Moscow and, as I said, Beijing.
So in the worst case scenario, does that mean that Ukraine is going to lose the war, or will Ukraine keep fighting?
Ukraine will keep fighting. Ukraine will keep fighting because they have no choice. And I always go back to what a very good friend of mine, Alexei Mikheyev, Ukraine's current ambassador in Berlin, said to me in the early days of the war. He said, Cormac, it's very simple. If Russia stops fighting, there will be no war. If Ukraine stops fighting, there will be no Ukraine. Back to what I said earlier, Putin's objective is the obliteration of Ukraine and Ukrainian national identity. He wants Ukraine for the riches that they possess and that Ukraine possesses, but also a Ukrainian nation, which, by the way, are very, very different to the Russian people. Don't ask me, ask the Ukrainians themselves. And the absolute thirst for freedom and democracy that the Ukrainian people demonstrated in Viktor Yushchenko's Orange Revolution, and again in the Revolution of Dignity on the Maidan between 2013 and 2014. This is more than Putin can risk, because he sees a thriving, successful, free democratic Ukraine on his doorstep as the most dangerous threat to his kleptocratic Kremlin regime, because that just might finally get through to the Russian people that there is a better way to live than under the kleptocracy which has robbed them of so much of the nation's wealth.
Well, you know, the democratic genie has well and truly escaped the Soviet lamp in Ukraine, and I don't think you can get genies back into the lamp again unless they actually want to go. And you're very clear that they don't want to go. But Cormac Smith, it's been a real pleasure talking to you again on Frontline today.
Always a pleasure, Philip.